TOEFL iBT writing section, there are two different tasks. The independent writing task, which we'll be looking at in these first sets of videos, and the integrated writing task. Let's take a look at the overview for both. On the independent writing task, there is only one writing response that you have to give. And you were given 30 minutes to plan, write, and revise a response of about 300 words during that time. In the integrated writing section, again, there is only one task in which you have to read an academic passage, listen to a professor's mini-lecture, and then finally plan, write, and revise a response in 20 minutes. Now, for both tasks, they must be typed. The TOEFL does not allow essays to be written by hand anymore. Now, in our first set of videos, we're going to be focusing on the independent writing task. Now, for the writing section, just like in the speaking section, the scores basically are provided holistically, which, if you recall, is an overall evaluation of your ability. Which means, really, the idea here is they're not counting individual errors, but really looking more in general at your ability to organize your thoughts, express your ideas clearly and logically, and use vocabulary appropriately. And you will see that this is often more important than demonstrating just grammatical accuracy, though of course grammar is important. Now, this is a sample of what the independent writing rubric looks like. So first off, you will notice that the maximum score is a 5. And again, you will notice that most of the language here is basically positive in nature. It accomplishes these particular things. So again, part of the key here that we're going to be looking at the beginning is how to address the topic itself. Throughout the rest of the video series, we will be looking at how to organize our response, thinking about how we can give appropriate explanations, exemplifications, and so on. In later videos, we'll discuss the concepts of unity, progression, and coherence. And then, of course, throughout the video series itself, we'll be focusing on the importance of the idea of vocabulary, word choice, as I mentioned, idiomaticity, which is focusing on using idiomatic language, and then, of course, making sure that it only has minor vocabulary and grammatical problems. So the first thing I like to tell students is our essays don't have to be perfect, but generally they have to be largely free of these kinds of problems. So that's basically what you need to get the best score. Now, we could continue to look at the different response levels, but clearly the 5 is the one that we're going to be discussing a lot throughout the video. So again, as we said before, the scale is 0 to 5. Content is generally more important than grammar. Organization is usually more important than the style, the way we write. And fluency and expression are definitely highly valued. I think the idea here is we want to give the test raters enough information to look at. So clearly, compared to the speaking section, the writing section, we're really looking at how we can express ourselves in a longer period of time and really giving them more to evaluate rather than just a thumbnail of our speaking ability. The writing section is a little bit different there. Now, this is the main topic that we'll be using throughout the video series. Now, of course, we're going to be looking at other topics as well. But let's go ahead and get familiar with this topic, as you will see it many times throughout the next several videos. Some people prefer to play team sports, while others prefer to play individual sports. Which do you prefer? Give examples and reasons to support your answer. So we'll be looking at this particular topic throughout the video and throughout the video series. Now, speaking of topics, let's go ahead and take a look at, in general, the categories of where the topics fall under. Now, first off, I think it's important for students to get familiar with the topics. And you will see one of the links listed below the video will be a direct link to the sample writing topics that ETS has provided to us in the past. But mostly the topics are of the personal opinion nature. And since this is the TOEFL, most of them revolve around daily life, but also involve university life. The topics themselves are not controversial, so you will not see any topics about sex or violence or politics. These are issues that the TOEFL does not want to address. And sometimes the topics might be hypothetical. Now, hypothetical is referring to imaginary or not real situations. So sometimes you might see a question that might ask you, what would you do in this particular case? Now, generally, the essays fall into 3 categories, and you will notice that sometimes the particular difference among them is pretty small. But the basic idea here is that they're all involving your personal opinion. But we need to look at each different type a little more carefully in order to be able to prepare a response. So there is what's called the defense essay, sometimes referred to in some textbooks as argumentative, comparison essay, and an essay we would generally refer to as explanatory. Let's take a look at each one. So first off, a defense essay, the first thing I want to remind you for all of the essay topics is that they involve your personal opinion. Now, typically in the essay structure itself, we need to include at least 2 reasons. This is true for all of the essay types, but I think it's worth mentioning specifically for the defense essay because you probably will see more defense essay topics than you'll see any of the other 2. Now, something we're going to address later throughout the video series is talking about the importance of being logical and consistent in our responses. So this is true, again, of all of the topics, but again, the defense essay is certainly one that you might see a lot. Now, in terms of the topic itself, how can we identify a defense essay? Well, generally in the topic, in the prompt, you will see words such as agree or disagree, or even the word prefer, such as you have to prefer one viewpoint over another. So look at these 2 examples. Do you agree or disagree with the following statement? People should sometimes do things that they do not enjoy doing. Use specific reasons and examples to support your answer. Is it better to enjoy your money when you earn it, or is it better to save your money for some time in the future? Use specific reasons and examples to support your opinion. So in this case, what I want you to think about is that in general, you have to choose one particular viewpoint and defend it. So in the first example, you have to choose either that you agree or disagree with the statement. In the second example, you have to choose from one of the 2 choices. Should we save our money or enjoy it now? So again, in general, these would fall under the category of defense essay. Now let's look at the comparison essay. And again, same idea. It's your personal opinion. But you will notice that in the body of the essay, we have to talk probably about the advantages of different viewpoints. So you will see, for example, it might ask you to discuss the advantages of one viewpoint and discuss the advantage of another. And then finally, the essay will almost always ask you to say which point you prefer. So this is, again, an important part of the essay itself. I generally tell students you need to make sure you give equal time to both points of view. Many times students spend way too much time on the first point and not enough time on the second, and then they run out of time. Again, you want to use signal words that are often contrasting. So in the essay, you'll probably need to use words such as however, or on the other hand, or on the contrary. And in the topic itself, you might see these particular words. Compare the advantages, or discuss the views or advantages. Now again, let's look at some sample topics. Some people choose friends who are different from themselves. Others choose friends who are similar to themselves. Compare the advantages of having friends who are different from you with the advantages of having friends who are similar to you. Which kind of friend do you prefer for yourself? Why? So again, there's the word compare, and then notice you have to compare the advantages of both sides, and then finally give your preference. So again, this is often part of the comparison essay on the test. Here's another one. Some people believe that a college or university education should be available to all students. Others believe that higher education should be available only to good students. Discuss these views. Which view do you agree with? Explain why. So again, notice we're given the idea that we're 2 different views we have to look at. We have to discuss them, and we have to decide which one we agree with. So again, notice the comparison essay on the TOEFL will require more than just comparing ideas. We also have to express which one we agree with or which one we prefer. Finally, the explanatory essay is generally fairly loose. It's fairly open. The essay itself will often ask just for your opinion. So again, you'll have to give 2 reasons, probably at least. And then in the topic itself, you will see words such as, what is your opinion? Or what do you do in this situation? So let's take a look at some samples. Your school has received a gift of money. What do you think is the best way for your school to spend this money? So again, notice there are no choices in the response itself. We get to choose, we get to select, we get to explain. The 20th century saw a great change. In your opinion, What is one change that should be remembered about the 20th century? Use specific reasons and details to explain your choice. So again, in this case, we get to give our opinion. Even though we're only focusing on one change, we probably should give 2 reasons why that one change would be so important. So I always find it helpful to play little games that kind of help us practice the ideas that we're learning in the video. So I think it's time to play a game I like to call Name That Topic. So in this game, we're going to look at examples, and we're basically going to guess, is it going to be a defense essay, a comparison essay, or an explanatory essay? Here's example number 1. What do you consider to be the most important room in a house? Why is this room more important to you than any other room? Use specific reasons and examples to support your opinion. Okay, so what do you think? Is it defense, comparison, or explanatory? Well, if you said explanatory, you are correct. In this case, we're not to defend one point of view over another. We're basically just to choose a room in the house and explain why we think it's important. Okay, let's try another one. Learning about the past has no value for those of us living in the present. Do you agree or disagree? Use specific reasons and examples to support your answer. Okay, so what do you think? Defense, comparison, or explanatory? Well, if you said defense, you're correct. The key words are, do you agree or disagree? Now let's think about our topic. Some people prefer to play team sports, others prefer to play individual sports. Which do you prefer? So is it defense, comparison, or explanatory? Well, if you said defense, again, you're correct. We have to give a preference and choose one side. In my experience, the defense essay is probably the most common of the 3, but that doesn't necessarily mean you will see one on the test. Remember, there's only one task. So again, why is it important to be able to identify this topic quickly? Well, remember, in order to write a good response, you first have to know what the requirements are going to be. But of course, this is only a starting point. The next thing we need to focus on is whether or not we understand the topic. So the idea here is if we want a good score on the TOEFL, we need to be able to think about a topic more deeply. That is going to help us give a better response. Now, what we're going to be demonstrating throughout this video series, and we've discussed this before in the speaking videos, is that preparing for a test is very different from actually taking the test. Much of what we're going to be doing in this video series is talking about how to prepare for the test. Obviously, you're not given a lot of time during the test itself. So one thing I like to share with students is to give them the opportunity to think about topics from different points of view. Now, even though these are topics that are kind of everyday, we usually don't spend a lot of time thinking about them. So consider this a great opportunity for us to start looking at them. Now, this was a similar topic we did, a similar exercise we did in our speaking videos. The idea of thinking about how to be for a particular argument and thinking about the arguments that are against that particular point. If you recall, we called that pros and cons. So remember, pros and cons are the idea of where we're looking at arguments that are for and against a certain point of view. So we're going to see a test topic similar to one we'll see in the TOEFL. We're going to see if we can identify whether those arguments that I'm listing are arguments for a particular side, against a particular side, or not related. So let's begin. So in our topic here, do you agree or disagree with the following statement? Face-to-face is better than other types of communication, such as letters, email, or telephone calls. Well, so what we're going to be demonstrating here is at the top, we're going to think face-to-face is better. So what are the pros and cons of that particular argument? If we agree with the statement, let's think about those arguments for and against it. So on the pro side, we're going to think about the arguments that state that face-to-face is better. On the con side, we're going to consider which types that the other types are better. So in order to play this exercise, I'm going to show you a particular argument. I want you to tell me which side does it belong to, or is the argument itself not related. Let's try the first one. Sometimes we just want to give a quick message without a long conversation. So technology helps facilitate that. So is that an argument for face-to-face or against it? Well, if you said it's against the face-to-face argument, you're correct. That would be considered a con argument. Okay, let's try another one. If you make a mistake, it's easier to correct by using a clarifying or corrective statement. So is this in favor of face-to-face or against it? Well, if you said in favor, you're correct. Because again, when you're talking to someone face-to-face, if you make a mistake, you can simply just clarify it at the moment. That's not so easy to do in a letter, email, or even a telephone call. You can see the person's reactions when you communicate, and you can respond accordingly. So which argument? Yeah, in general, it's going to be for face-to-face. Now, of course, you could say, but can't we also use new technology like Skype or FaceTime? And that's true, you can. But that really is an interesting argument because it is somewhat face-to-face. It's not email. It's certainly not exactly a telephone call. It's almost like seeing the person face-to-face. So again, Skype could be part of the argument here. Email is an electronic form of communication and is very helpful. So is that in favor of face-to-face or against it? Or is it not related? In this case, it's not related. It doesn't actually make an argument for either side. It just describes that email is a communication form, which of course is not the point. Here's another one. It's often difficult to get together in person, so email, texting, telephone is easier to communicate thanks to today's technology. In this case, that seems to be an argument in favor of the other side, so that's against face-to-face. So in this particular argument, what I want us to think about is how can pros and cons help us with our actual topic. So now let's think about the pros and cons of this argument. Now, of course, this is a little bit different. We're going to have to think about the pros and cons of both sides, whether we favor team sports or individual sports. So in this case, we're going to start with team sports. What are some pro arguments we could use and some cons that would be against team sports? Well, for example, I think one of the big pros for team sports is how in team sports we learn how to get along and work with others. This is an important skill we learn later in life. We can also learn from people who have more experience than us. So sometimes we're on a team, there may be other people there who know more than we do. Now, of course, a con could be that if we're part of a team, maybe our overall development may not move along as quickly because we might depend too much on other people. Again, on some team sports, different people play very specific roles, for example, like in soccer, and maybe we don't necessarily have a lot of freedom. Another problem, of course, on teams is sometimes we have weaker members, and that could affect the team's success. So the idea here is we see some good things about team sports, then we think about some things that might be against that argument. Now let's look at individual sports. Well, obviously one pro to an individual sport is it might develop our overall athletic ability. For example, in tennis, you have to be in really good shape in order to play because you are involved all the time. We also can see how our own hard work will directly connect to our successes and failures. That's not always easy in a team sport, where sometimes we may not even play. Now, of course, there are some cons. We don't have teammates, so we do lose some opportunities to learn from other people. And of course, if you have the weakness in your game, there's no teammate to depend on. So for example, in tennis, it's all you. So yes, you may learn the value of failure even when you try hard. So what can pros and cons help us do? Well, the first thing we need to think about is it actually helps us think more from different perspectives. It helps us in making better choices when we think about how we're going to explain our answer. Oftentimes, if we can anticipate an argument against our choice, then we can prepare for it and write a better answer. So what I want you to think about is oftentimes a lot of the activities I like to do are kind of similar to thinking about both sides of your brain. We want both sides of our brain to kind of think about arguing with each other. That helps us form a stronger, clearer argument. And if you notice, sometimes the cons of one argument can be just as powerful as the pros of another. So when we're trying to make our case, especially for our team sports and individual sports argument, sometimes we might use the cons of the individual sport if I want to prove how team sports are better. But again, the idea here is to think of this as sort of like a brain activity. And this is oftentimes a fun activity to do with someone else when you're preparing for the test. Now, we're starting to think about, okay, now that we're in the TOEFL, obviously there's some tricks and things we need to keep in mind. Well, one thing we need to keep in mind is the importance of being logical. Clearly, there are no right or wrong answers to the essays, but the problem here is not every answer is necessarily a great answer. We need to make sure that the answers we give are logical. What the TOEFL is really looking for is to see if you can express yourself in a new and interesting way. But you also have to make sure that your argument basically makes sense. And really, if you're unable to use logic, I have seen from other examples that you could potentially lose points if you don't use good vocabulary, if you don't have a logical argument. You may have strong vocabulary and good organization, and even appropriate grammatical structures. But if your argument makes no sense, that could obviously be a problem. Now we're going to take another essay topic again just for a moment to start thinking about the importance of logic and why logic is going to be helpful to us. So let's look at this essay topic. In some countries, teenagers have jobs while they are still students. Do you think this is a good idea? Support your opinion by using specific reasons and details. Now, the first thing we need to think about as we look at this topic is that we need to think about, well, what would logically be a job that teenagers would have? I think that's obviously important because if we can't relate to the topic, this might be pretty difficult to think of a good answer for. So let's think for a moment. We're going to brainstorm and think about what are some jobs that seem to be logical and not logical for teenagers to have. Well, for example, a lot of jobs that students have generally involve either retail or movie theaters or fast food restaurants or perhaps even helping their parents. Mostly jobs that we would consider to be in the service business, jobs that don't necessarily require a lot of training. And of course, there could be other part-time jobs too, maybe mowing the lawn, for example, or helping a neighbor. Now, it would also be, though, we need to think about the importance of the side that's not so logical. For example, none of these jobs is well paid. So that would not be logical to think that these jobs pay a lot of money. Also, it would not be logical to think that teenagers will be working full-time during the school day. It's possible they might work maybe a full day on Saturday, but generally they don't work full-time jobs while they're students. And of course, these jobs are not professional either. We think of professional positions as jobs that require a lot of training. Most jobs that teenagers have generally have very little training. Now, why is logic important here? Well, part of the idea is if we can demonstrate that we have some experience with this type of question, then that will show that we understand the topic very well. And sometimes if students cannot relate to the topic, sometimes that makes it difficult for them to give a good answer. So really, if you're trying to argue that it's a good thing for teenagers to get a job, do you really know what the requirements would be? Do you really know what difficulties students would face? Well, think about yourself. Did you ever have a job when you were a teenager in school? So the idea is we can think better about the argument and think about the logic behind it, especially if we have experience with it. And I think that's important. The TOEFL wants to see if you really can make a logical argument. Now let's think for a moment about another aspect. What would be the difficulties that teenagers would face? Again, we need to think about what would be logical and not logical. Well, for example, it would be logical to think that their work responsibilities are going to conflict with their homework. So yes, there is the possibility that grades would suffer. Clearly, time is something that we don't have an infinite amount of. It would be logical to think that sometimes the job might require too many hours. This is often a problem with the conflict between the workplace and school. Many times their boss might require them to work long hours on the weekend. It also might be possible to think that sometimes teenage jobs can be dangerous. For example, working in a movie theater. Even though you might have lots of other people around, again, sometimes at the movie theater we may have to remove a rude customer. Now, it would not be logical, of course, to argue that students are getting paid too much. That's clearly not true. However, it is logical to think that they're making more money than they did before they had the job. Of course, it would also not be logical to think that there's no conflict. Of course there's going to be conflict. Nobody has an infinite amount of time. And I don't think it would also be logical to say that you could work a job and your grades would still be perfectly the same. Clearly, when you work a job, you have less time to study. Now, why is logic important here? Well, because again, we can give a better, more reasoned answer. So, for example, it would not be realistic if you said that the job would never interfere with schoolwork, because as we said before, there are only so many hours available in the day and week. So what you need to be prepared to think about is, yes, we need to recognize that the job would probably interfere somewhat. So how could you respond? How could you make a better answer if you do believe that teenagers need jobs? Well, for example, we could say that we approve of the idea that teenagers should have jobs, but with the understanding that it should be limited to only a few hours a week. So, for example, if a teenager tries to get a job where the boss would require too many hours, then probably the teenager should quit that job or find another one. But we could say that it is important for them to get a real-world education. But the key is to focus on the fact that academic education should take priority at this stage in the teenager's life. So again, by thinking of the topic logically, I realize that I can give a slightly better, more, as we would say, a more detailed answer. We think that teenagers do need jobs because it gives them a very important real-world education. But if it begins to affect their homework, clearly their academic education needs to be more important. Now, let's think about our topic. What are some issues of logic we can think about? What are some things that would be logical and not logical to consider about our team sports and individual sports? Well, first off, we have to think that individual sports, the truth is, even though you don't have teammates, it is pretty common to think that individual sports do have coaches. So yes, there are other people that individuals could learn from instead of just their teammates. And of course, it is possible to think, yes, playing with better team members can actually help develop our individual growth. A lot of this might depend on the sport, but the truth is it doesn't completely mean that it doesn't mean that you can't learn anything or are not going to develop at all. It's only referring to the possibilities. Now, of course, it would not be logical to think that all teams are basically acting in the same way. The truth is some members are not necessarily interested in helping others. So we have to be realistic to say that, in team sports, there's the possibility that we might learn from other people, but the truth is it's not logical to think that it would always happen. Also, we need to recognize that sometimes there are not better members on a team. The truth is you might be the best player on the team, and that may not necessarily help you develop if there aren't any other experienced members on the team. Of course, you could learn leadership and be a good leader. But it is not logical to think that there are always going to be better members. So by looking at these two ideas, we're going to kind of think about these as we continue along, because the purpose here throughout the video series is we're going to take our topic of team sports and individual sports and develop it into an actual essay. So we will see some of these issues of logic and not logic again. So here in our first video, we talked about the importance of identifying the topic. If we do that, that'll help us give an effective response. As we said before, there are topics in three categories. Defense topics, such as topics that ask to agree or disagree, or which do I prefer. There are also comparison topics, where we have to compare ideas or discuss the advantages or disadvantages. And explanatory topics, where we have to give our opinion or state what we think, or what I would do in these situations. And of course, we need to remember that all of these topics involve our personal opinion. Now remember that we need to think deeply about our response. If we're going to give a good answer, we have to think about different options. Now, the idea, as we discussed in this video, is one thing we can kind of quickly think about are the advantages and disadvantages of our choices. Now, we don't really have a lot of time to think about that during the test, but we want to make sure you can choose the best possible argument you can. So you probably do have at least a little bit of time to start thinking about which answer you want to give. And of course, we also discussed in the video, we need to make sure our answer choice is logical. So the idea here is, are all options exactly the same? And think about your own personal experience. What do those personal experiences tell you? For example, in our teenager example, if you had a job before as a teenager, then you probably know what are the expectations of that type of response. Now, throughout the video, the next set of videos, we'll be looking at the actual writing of the essay. We'll focus especially on the format of the response, how to respond in the given time, and thinking about meeting the requirements of the essay. Now, throughout the video, we will be using the same sample topic, so the team, sports, and individual ones. So please make sure to think about how you would respond as you prepare to watch the next video. So this is something we're going to carry throughout the next few videos. Now finally, as we've mentioned in every video series, we do have some recommended materials that would help you for the test. Of course, the official TOEFL websites, ETS's official website, and the new TOEFL Go Anywhere website. Again, I would highly recommend the official guide to the TOEFL test by ETS. This is also available from ETS's website. And our new TOEFL TOEIC preparation website, the link of which you can find at the bottom of the video. And you will see also some links in this video to help us find a list of possible writing topics that you can see on the test. So we'll see you next time for Part 2, TOEFL Independent Writing Task, Writing the Introduction. Thanks for watching.